TV7 Israel News is made possible thanks to your generous donations.
Shalom and good evening. This is TV7 Israel News broadcast to you from Jerusalem. And in today's top stories, the deadline as part of which Hamas is required to release all of the hostages by Saturday noon is fast approaching, with Israeli defense establishment preparing for all contingencies. France is calling on Israel to allow UNIFIL to replace the IDF in Lebanon after the U.S. consented Israel maintain 5 strategic military outposts in southern Lebanon. Iran voices outrage over reports that Israel is preparing to strike its nuclear infrastructure. The looming deadline, as part of which Hamas is required to release all of the hostages by Saturday noon, is drawing near, while the Islamist terror group said it would release only 3 hostages in exchange for dozens of Palestinian terror operatives. It is important to know that while circulating reports quoting unnamed Israeli and non-Israeli sources claim that an agreement was indeed reached between Israel and the Islamist Hamas regarding the terms of the hostage release deal, the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem denied that any agreement was reached with the Palestinian terror group. Meanwhile, Israel's top political and security brass held a lengthy consultation last night at the IDF Southern Command in Beersheba, during the course of which an extensive discussion focused on the hostages' release and rising prospects of a resumption of hostilities in the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, in Yemen, the Houthi tribal leader Abdel Malik al-Houthi made a televised address in which he pledged to relaunch hostilities against Israel and the United States if President Donald Trump would pursue his proposed plan for the Gaza Strip.
We will never stand idly by if the Americans and the Israelis move towards implementing this unjust, aggressive, and criminally malicious plan by force. We will confront their aggression with force and military intervention and jihad for the sake of Almighty Allah by all means, and we will never stand idly by towards such an aggressive plan against the Palestinian people.
Meanwhile, at the United Nations in New York, the world body's Security Council held an emergency session on the situation in Yemen after an employee of the World Food Program, who was arbitrarily detained by the Iranian proxy Ansar Allah, which is dominated by the Houthi tribe, was murdered while in captivity.
The deeply troubling development is the 4th wave of arbitrary detentions of United Nations staff conducted by Ansar Allah last month. These detentions are not only a violation of fundamental human rights, but also a direct threat to the United Nations' ability to provide humanitarian assistance to millions in need. Even more deplorable is the death, while detained by Ansar Allah, of a UN colleague working for the World Food Program.
In addition to the murder of a UN staff member, with over a dozen UN personnel still arbitrarily incarcerated by the Houthis, the Iranian proxy is evidently escalating tensions on multiple fronts in Yemen, threatening a collapse of the country's fragile ceasefire.
Regrettably, we have also seen a continuation of military activity in Yemen, with reports of the movement of reinforcement and equipment towards the front lines, and shelling, drone attacks, and infiltration attempts by Ansar Allah on multiple front lines, including in Abyan, Al-Dali, Laj, Ma'arib, Sada, Shabwa, and Taiz. I call on the parties to refrain from military posturing and retaliatory measures that could lead to further tension and risk plunging Yemen back into conflict.
There are growing voices amongst the formerly Saudi-led coalition who are calling for a resumption of fighting against the Houthis, since Iran has lost much of its capacity to sustain its proxy in Yemen for yet another lengthy campaign of fighting.
Yemen stands at another critical juncture. The choices made today will determine the course of its future. A sustainable resolution to this conflict is still possible. I am not naive. This will not be easy. It requires commitment, courage, and action from all sides. The parties must engage in good faith and take the necessary steps to turn commitments into reality. I am aware that some think that they could get a better outcome through the resumption of full-scale military operations. I want to be clear. This would be a mistake for Yemen and a mistake for the stability in the wider region.
Turning to Lebanon, where several hundreds of Hezbollah supporters attempted to storm Beirut International Airport after Lebanese authorities refused to grant an Iranian aircraft permission to land, after it was revealed that Iran had significant sums of illicit funds on board the civilian aircraft earmarked for its proxy in Lebanon, namely Hezbollah. The Lebanese military responded to the belligerence of Hezbollah by forcefully dispersing the mob, essentially acknowledging that unless it prevents Hezbollah's violations of the ceasefire, Lebanon may be drawn into yet another cycle of hostilities with Israel. A reminder to the consequences of war was yet again displayed last night when the IDF announced that the Israel Air Force conducted intelligence-based strikes on Hezbollah military sites containing weapons and launchers that pose a direct threat to the Israeli home front. In its statement, the IDF spokesperson's unit underscored that the terrorist activity in these sites is a clear violation of the understandings between Israel and Lebanon. Moreover, the Israeli military underscored its intentions to continue to operate to remove any threat to the state of Israel, remains committed to the understandings, and will operate to prevent any attempt of rearmament or rebuild of force by the Hezbollah terrorist organization. Meanwhile, this morning, U.S. Central Command announced that the cessation of hostilities implementation mechanism met for the fifth time in Nakura today. UNIFIL hosted the meeting with the United States serving as chair. They were joined by France, the Lebanese Armed Forces, or LAF, and the Israeli Defense Forces. The attendees conducted military technical planning for the transfer of all remaining villages in the southern Litani area to full LAF control prior to February 18th. It is important to highlight, as was reported by TV7 yesterday, that the IDF will maintain 5 military outposts that are to be manned by hundreds of IDF troops, even after Israel concludes its expected military withdrawal next week. However, France is evidently unhappy with the arrangement, hoping to convince Jerusalem to accept UNIFIL forces instead of the IDF deployments.
Nous avons travaillé à
We have worked to formulate a proposal that can satisfy the security expectations of Israel, which plan to stay longer at certain points on the blue line. We are going to propose that some of the most seasoned UNIFIL contingents, including the French contingent, can replace the Israeli armed forces on these observation points. The Secretary General of the United Nations confirmed to me on Tuesday morning that he agreed with this proposal, which was not a foregone conclusion, and which I welcome. It is now up to us to convince the Israelis that this solution is likely to allow a complete and final withdrawal.
Complet et définitif, souhaitons-le, de leur armée au sud du Liban.
Turning to Iran, where President Masoud Pezeshkian responded to circulating reports regarding supposed Israeli intentions to strike the Islamic Republic's nuclear infrastructure during the course of 2025, claiming that whatever is destroyed, the Ayatollah regime will defiantly rebuild.
Today, they are threatening us, saying things like we will come and strike your nuclear facilities in Natanz or some other place. Go ahead and strike if you want. It is our young scientists' knowledge that has built that place. If you strike 100 of the sites, they will build 1,000 others instead. You cannot eliminate them. Yes, you can destroy a building, you can come and strike here, but those who built it, if they are present and aware, you cannot eliminate them. They will rebuild, even if something happens.
President Pezeshkian continued by noting that while Tehran intends to negotiate with the United States, it does not feel like the U.S. is serious in its diplomatic overtures.
We are not saying that we won't negotiate. We never said we wouldn't talk. But when Trump comes and announces, 1, you must do this, 2, 3, 4, and at the same time imposes all sanctions on us, then says, let's negotiate. If you were truly a man of negotiation, why act dishonorably? Why block people's access to water, bread, medicine, and food?
It is interesting to point out that the Iranian president also insisted that so long as Iranian unity prevails, the regime will have the capacity to withstand rising international pressures.
They cannot block our path. We will find our way, provided we do not fight with each other and respect our worthy ones.
Meanwhile, Iranians are already feeling the brunt of the Trump administration's maximum pressure campaign, with the Iranian rial plummeting to all-time lows.
They used to come and announce if there was a change in the exchange rate of the dollar, even if it was 500 tomans, 1,000 tomans. The government would say it was a temporary rate bubble or at least give an explanation. However, now for around the period of a week, around 15,000 tomans have been added to the rate of the dollar, and there has been no explanation, nothing even to convince people or make them hopeful for the future. We were hopeful that this new government would improve the economic situation. Despite all the promises they made, they have done nothing so far.
Thank you for watching TV7 Israel News. It is important to highlight that TV7 Israel is a non-profit ministry with all of our productions exclusively reliant on the generosity of our viewers. Therefore, if you're blessed by the content of our programs, I would like to encourage you to support TV7 Israel with a donation. You can do so via our website at www.tv7israelnews.com. Separately, I'd like to ask you, as ever, pray for the peace of Jerusalem and salvation of Israel. Jonathan Essen wishing you a Shabbat Shalom u'Mevorach, and God willing, we will see you during our next update. Until then, Shalom from Jerusalem.